All right. Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar, where we're really looking forward to hearing from all of our wonderful panelists and really get a good explanation of what does social work look like in practice, in particular in the area of child welfare. So I'm very excited to have you all join us tonight. And I wanted to walk through a couple of things before I allow the panelists to introduce themselves. But first, before we get started, I wanted to just introduce myself. I'm Jen McLaughlin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Admissions. I'm also a proud MSW alumna from the UW Seattle program. And I'll be sort of moderating tonight to help us get through. So first, I wanted to start with land acknowledgement. So the University of Washington and all of our institutions exist on Indigenous land. The Seattle campus is situated on the traditional territory of the Duwamish people. We acknowledge the past, present, and future Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. This land acknowledgement is just one small act in the ongoing process of working to be in good relationship with the land and the people of the land. And I'm kind of dialing in tonight from Linwood, which I am on the lands of Coast Salish, Stillaguamish, Snohomish, and Suquamish. If you're curious about where you are and wanted to know more, we'll drop a link in the chat so you can look that up too. A couple housekeeping tips tonight. We're missing seeing all of your lovely faces on the participant side of things, but as a webinar, we will be recording and hopefully sharing this out. We still would love your participation. So if tonight perhaps you want to include in the chat where you're watching from, or if you have questions along the way, we would love for you to add those to the Q&A button or the section below. We also wanted to let folks know that there is live captioning, so you will be able to select that as an option from your Zoom menu as well. I think that is it for Q&A or for housekeeping, and we'll have Q&A towards the end, so definitely ask your questions now and I'll try to incorporate them and integrate them as we go. We would love to hear from you. And I think with that, we're going to run through some questions with the panelists, but I'd love to have everyone introduce yourselves with a short introduction, and then we'll jump into kind of some facilitated questions. So how about first, if we can start with Deborah.
Good evening, I'm Deborah Collins. I use she, her pronouns, and I have my master's in social work. I am an alum from UW, and I was also in the CTAP program. I'm also here in the North Seattle area on the Coast Salish and Duwamish ancestral lands. And I am currently an associate director of programs for our parent support services at Amara. It's a nonprofit organization here in Seattle.
All right, how about Shanti?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shanti Johnson. I am a field advisor here at the University of Washington for the Child Welfare Training Advancement Program, CTAP. I am a CTAP alum and a UW alum as well. Thank you for coming.
All right. Akanksha?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Akanksha Sinha, dialing in from Seattle. I'm the Senior Director for Research Services at Casey Family Programs. So if anyone's interested in research and really looking at research from the grassroots and a day-to-day perspective, that's what I do in my job. And I received my master's and my PhD from Boston College, both in social work, summer double legal. Excited to be here.
Beth.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Beth Hughes Simpson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a field instructor for the CTAP program. So the Child Welfare Training and Advancement Program at UW Seattle. It's wonderful to see all of you. And I'm also a CTAP grad.
Awesome. Fernando?
Hi, folks. I'm apologize. I'm here at a soccer game, so my sons Fernando Clara, he, him, his pronouns. I'd like to recognize that I'm on the land of the Duwamish. Pay respect to their elders and mine, past, present, and future. I'm a senior director with strategic engagements and initiatives within KC Family Programs. And essentially right now my role is to work with collaboratively with those folks with that lived experience, and essentially put them in the right place in the right time with the right folks, whether it be philanthropic sector, government, or even the business sector, working a lot with community-based organizations. And I'm also a graduate of the School of Social Work from the UW, as well as a CTAP alum.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking on double duty tonight and joining us, and also cheering on your son. That's awesome. So appreciate you all being here. We're really excited. Number one, I think, to hear an opportunity, so many wonderful CTAP, Child Welfare Training and Advancement Program alum, but also just to sort of hear more about what the field of child welfare entails, and just kind of hear more examples. So many people come to us and wonder, what is social work? And it's such a broad field, and social workers work in a variety of settings. They hold a wide range of roles, as you can see from this, even this small panel, across different systems with diverse populations. So we're going to ask some questions to kind of learn a little bit more in depth. So perhaps we can just go around for whoever would like to answer. How would you describe child welfare? And feel free to just unmute to keep us moving.
I will start. Just on a kind of a broader scope, for me, child welfare is really a specialty in social work. Social work is very broad and has so much diversity in it, but it's kind of really specializes in kind of building strengths within family and community to really help provide a safe, stable, loving home environments for children, and to intervene or to provide additional supports and resources for when there are challenges and when there's harm involved or risk of harm involved. So that's kind of the broader scope of what child welfare, in my line of work at least, has been.
I can build on that. I think the broader view, so we take in my world, in my experience, we've taken the two aspects, the thing that Deborah said around really looking at families and trying to make sure that the children are doing well and services are being provided to them. But then also from a policy point of view, how are we taking certain prevention strategies? So how are we looking at community well-being and community strengths? How are we looking at family prevention centers around, like, what are systemic issues that we should be targeting? What are things that we can do at the front end so that families can be stronger from generation to generation? So in addition to the family unit, one of the things within KC and externally in other projects also that I try to look at is how do we make sure that we're making communities stronger so that the end product is that the kids are feeling stronger and the family unit is in a much better situation than they were previously.
That's great. Does anyone have anything else to add? That was such a nice, broad spectrum description from kind of the individual to more macro.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I would agree with what folks just mentioned. I think really in child welfare, you're working with folks who are often going through an episode, right? We all go through ups and downs, and a lot of times these folks are we're interacting with them and during the downtimes. Add on top of that a lot of a lot of folks that are coming into child welfare is not necessarily due to abuse, but mostly neglect, and neglect includes poverty. So often I see child welfare really as sort of being an interpreter for these families that are interacting with housing, other social safety nets programs, legal programs. I mean, I could tell you as a social worker, I had difficulty understanding a lot of the documents, right? And I'm walking here with a master's degree. And so I can only imagine how difficult it can be for folks that might not have that education. So child welfare is really about is working with those folks and doing a lot of interpretation.
Thanks so much. So a lot of what we get asked, especially when we're, tabling or we're running into young people in particular, they say, well, in child welfare, is the work primarily focused on like direct work with children? What would you say?
For my part, I started in direct practice. I did the child welfare training and advancement program. It really gave me a different perspective because I got to work directly with a lot of these folks. Really led me to understand that, these are the people that are experts in their own lives, right? And so it's that led me to, again, still continue what I'm doing. I no longer do direct practice. I haven't done direct practice for a good maybe 12, 15 years now. But regardless of the fact, I'm still working with folks with lived experience, and oftentimes I'm interacting, and these folks are interacting with government officials, philanthropists, other community-based organizations as peer learning groups. So no, at least from I would say child welfare perspective, I also had the opportunity to work with Mockingbird Family, which has a really good way of working with foster parents, as well as with children and that are working in foster care or have to enter foster care. And never worked directly with any children or families, but the program is literally across the world, and so it affects a lot of children and families.
Yeah, there are a lot of jobs that are directly supporting children and in the family system. And then you have so many layers, as Fernando kind of mentioned, with going all the way up to like policy and kind of advocacy work to working within other community organizations or partners that provide services or resources for families or children that may not directly work with those individuals, but provide a support system with that, whether that is in a more bureaucratic government or other nonprofit realm, to then that trickle down to the direct level of actually providing, whether it's counseling services or parenting skills and strengthening support systems for families or relative caregivers. So there's a whole range of either direct or non-indirect work with children, and from varying levels of even like education levels too, whether you're working as in a residential facility for children or adults to working in Olympia at headquarters with the Department of Children and Family Services, or with lobbying different issues with legislatures. So there's a whole spectrum of levels, and really depending on what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and what your career path may lead you to.
So can I just add one thing? I see there's a question, but I think, the name, like when I'll talk about just public child welfare, and when we think about kind of what that looks like, I think a lot of times people go in and are like, I love working with kids. And actually, yes, children are definitely at the focus of our work, like the safety of children, that is the core of what we do. However, like we believe that children are best with their families, when they're with their families and when they're with their communities. So through serving the children, we're really working with the parents to ensure that they are able to safely parent their children. So I think on like just a direct practice, like when you think of public child welfare, like day to day, like it's very simple, like not all the systems that we work with, because we definitely do work with a lot of agencies, but we're really working with the families to help them safely parent their kids and communities, of course. Thanks.
Awesome. Anyone have anything else to add? All right. So the next, and we're kind of like starting with all these like a little bit of myth busters at the beginning, right? So many people really only think about CPS workers. That's kind of a stereotypical lens in terms of thinking about what social workers do or who they are. What roles can social workers play within this field? And I know you've mentioned some aspects, but if folks want to jump in, and I don't know, Akanksha, if you want to start, maybe.
Sure. I guess, from the people that I hear, it gives a great example of how many different roles people can play in the child welfare field. If I look at my background itself and people that I typically work with, we have a full gamut of people that are direct practice. So you have caseworkers who are really looking at family interactions and day-to-day interactions. Then you have people that might be much more in the program management side of things. So if you're somebody who's interested more in the macro side of managing a nonprofit that has a mission towards child welfare, that's another potential profession angle to go to. Research and evaluation is very dear to my heart. So that's something, again, there's a whole, and UW has a great program for research. So really thinking through what are the ways we can build evidence about programs and practices that are really benefiting children and families and communities as well. Policy and advocacy, a massive piece around really thinking through how do you push certain policies at the national, state, or county level as well. I mean, there's so many, like FFPSA, for example, your family first policies, things if you're interested in food insecurity, so looking at lunch programs. There's so many gamut of programs that are there that you can really be, again, at the macro level, advocating at the state as well as federal level. And then the last piece would be really thinking through foundations. So both Fernando and I work at a foundation. So it's really looking at pushing forward and supporting communities as well as states and really investing in programs, services, as well as issues that we feel are important to the mission around how do you make communities safer and families stronger in terms of addressing inequities. So that's a whole other section of a professional world. That's why I think social work has a speciality and a uniqueness that we can fit anywhere because of the very broad way in which our professional development is done. And if you just see going from direct practice all the way to macro, all the way to research, all the way to academia, you have all of these different pieces in which we can easily fit into and really excel.
Thanks so much. And I want to welcome Kaylee. Thanks for joining us. Maybe we can pause for a moment to allow you to introduce yourself. And we were kind of just talking about what roles social workers can play in the field. So it'd be lovely to hear about what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry that I was late. I had a client that came in literally 3 minutes before this started. Was helping them out. My name is Kaylee Canby, and I am a guardianship social worker for the Tulalip tribes up in northern Snohomish County area, Marysville. I am, like I said, a guardianship social worker. So at the tribe, I'm sort of at the tail end of these kiddos' journeys. Right? They come in through CPS and then they have their ongoing social worker for at least a year. And then when they move into guardianship, they come into a little bit more permanency. So the tribe does not typically support adoption of its tribal kiddos to members outside of the tribe. And so guardianship is really that solution that they've come up with in order to create permanency and also keep the kiddos tied to their community and their families. So guardianship is it's very similar to sort of adoption. So I do the guardianship side and help kiddos find permanency and find their forever homes.
Thanks and welcome. So does anyone have any other aspects to add in terms of what roles social workers can play in the field?
I'd love to add a little more as well. And I was thinking about this. In the years I've been a social worker in this particular area, I've worked with a lot of different community partners and providers that provide direct services to whether it's the parents or to the children in a variety of different ways where maybe their agency isn't necessarily focused in the child welfare arena, but they interact with the system pretty frequently with their participants. And so it could be related to maybe it's housing, or maybe it's related to substance use disorder and treatment and recovery services, to maybe they have are providing counseling and mental health supports to both the parent and the children, and kind of in a reunification focused way. So there's also like early intervention and child development providers that also work with the parents, whether it's from a public health nurse and other developmental and educational and medical kind of perspectives too. So there's a lot of these professionals who interact with the child welfare system that support and also help strengthen the skills that these families need. And maybe it's not just the parents, but it's maybe the foster family or the relative caregivers to kind of really strengthen the relationships that they all have, as well as the community bonds that they have together, and do a lot of repair and healing within those systems. And so there's a lot of these like really amazing, supportive, and a lot of very skilled professionals out there who maybe have social work backgrounds as well as maybe other credentials, but they are interacting within this like DCYF umbrella of child welfare. And so it's been really amazing to like connect to all of these different roles that people have, and how we all interrelate and really integrate into a system for this particular family, and individualize those plans for those families. So, and I've also had the privilege to work with some amazing parent advocates, whether they have their own lived experience of having navigated the child welfare system, and then go on to represent parents in the kind of the legal side of things with when children are removed or there's a dependency, and really help the parents navigate a very complicated system that is hard for everybody to go through, let alone someone who's not a professional and went to school to understand the system. So those people are also desperately needed, so that our families know what their rights are. They know what to expect and how to advocate and feel empowered for themselves as well, because it's a very vulnerable and very chaotic time in their lives. And so we have all of these different players who play really important roles in supporting families.
And there was a question that was asked, and I might reframe it a little bit to see what about in terms of are anyone aware of experiences in faith-based organizations where that might interact with the child welfare system or child welfare work or policy?
Yeah, I can answer. Sorry, I was dodging the ball there. Yeah, I would say actually a lot of child welfare organizations, especially if you look across the country, a lot of the folks that are providing the foster care services are faith-based organizations. So I've actually gotten to work with quite a bit in New York and California. And then also a lot of faith-based organizations are the ones that are providing services to the families that are being reunified here in the U.S. as they're crossing the border.
Great, thanks so much for those examples. I want to pause our usual lineup, because I think the next question was actually really a nice one to kind of interject. So I wonder how you think of equity when you work in your field. So how is equity kind of approached? How is it relevant to the work that you do? So maybe Shanti or Kaylee, you want to jump in?
I guess I can go. So as far as equity work, our community is really unique, being a tribal community. And a lot of the social workers that kind of have this social work background, we're not always viewed in the nicest light. And so I think it really comes into play when we work with our families and just trying to be as transparent as possible, right? Leveling that playing field, explaining things in ways that people will understand without being condescending, taking into account cultural norms historical trauma, right? Just generational trauma. Meeting the families where they're at is a huge thing as well. And really just understanding that this community is extremely unique, needing to, and for the social workers as well, right? Like doing their own outside research as far as the community goes, right? We're not going to take one tribal member and be like, tell us all about the history and all the things, right? So doing our own research, I think it just like really levels the playing field, and helps us serve our families so much better. And meeting them where they're at really does promote equity. And in turn, the families feel like they can approach us and talk things through in a way that's really unique and connect with us in ways that help promote healing and help promote growth.
Thanks, Kaylee. I think one of the things about child welfare, and that's like the model that we're trying to get to, right? Where every family feels like they can be themselves and come in with whatever reasons that they came into the system and be able to be seen and heard and moving really towards having safety for their children and getting out of the system. What we find in child welfare is that we are representative of the greater societal ill. So like Fernando said earlier, poverty is a real driver of the number of kids that we see in the public child welfare system. And so when you look at our clientele, we have overrepresentation of Black children, of Latino children, of Indigenous children. And so there is a term that is used in child welfare is disproportionality. And so there's always a focus on how do we address the overrepresentation of children of color in care. And different parts of the country have different numbers. And I will also add in there that mixed race kids are part of that. So if you identify as one of those groups, you as a mixed kid will also be part of that. And so we really are looking at, depending on where you are in the country doing public child welfare, you'll have a higher number of one of or more of those populations. And so part of our work around equity is really to address where are those numbers coming from. And what we have really found is that it's all the way from whoever is calling and then to our policies about how do we get kids back home. And so there's a lot of opportunity for change to happen in the system around equity and around inclusion of families as the experts of their own lives and their own cultures. And so really when we're looking at, equity, the child welfare is a safety catchment for kids who maybe are not being cared for at a certain standard. And so what we want to do is make sure that that standard isn't biased because a family is a family of color. And so it takes a lot of work. And that's where, as a master's level practitioner, we really dive into that at the School of Social Work. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do you identify it? How do you identify it in yourself so that you are aware of when the system is putting you in that agent role to perpetuate some of these things, because we all are part of these systems. And so as we look at equity and as we look at our role as social workers, we really try to pay attention to those aspects of the work. And there's places and organizations like the National Indian Child Welfare Association is focused specifically on addressing all of the situations that have happened and continue to happen for Indigenous children in child welfare. And so there's organizations that are developed to really help address this because it is a societal issue. It's not just the issue for those parents.
Thanks so much for that question and for some of those responses to a very complicated and complex issue. So I wanted to kind of just go around. I think this is always kind of the most interesting part for most participants, is just to sort of hear a little bit more about your journey into child welfare. Like, where did this interest stem from? And perhaps we can start with Deborah.
Hi, yeah. So I am a Korean adoptee and came to the U.S. when I was 6 years old. And throughout my life, I've was always really interested in learning about my identity and the history of Korean adoption, and that kind of led me into a little bit more around child welfare. But I also grew up with parents who are retired social workers, and so we have this kind of a big family kind of culture around social justice and a lot of values, both professional and volunteer work, and just really infusing our family culture of helping others and being of service. And so that really was kind of like the building blocks of what I was growing up with, and went into college out of state, came back and went to grad school. And I learned about the CWTAP program, and it's just thought like, wow, that was a really great opportunity. My parents actually, funny enough, like were trying to convince me not to do it. They're like, it's going to be one of the hardest things you will do as a social worker. And I'm like, well, I'm not backing down from this challenge. Like I really want to work with kids and families. And I, brought the lens of like, what would have happened if my birth family, if things turned out differently for them or for me, or even for other families that didn't have the different social services or supports that they could have had. And so not that I was going to change the whole world or anything, but I just really felt like there was a lot that I could contribute and learn as well. And so I went into the CTAP program, just really had an amazing time. I was actually in the evening program, so I got to meet with a lot of other students who were currently working at the department when I was in school. And so I got to hear firsthand what they were going through as social workers. And they were going back to school, like in their, like later in their adulthood and in their careers. And I thought, that's really inspiring. And they're still wanting to do this work, even after the years of time that they've been at the department and working with families. And they brought such richness to our class discussions and the material. Like they were able to really help me paint a picture for like what I was going to get myself into. And the practicums were really amazing too. I was able to work at one of the Seattle DCYF offices for my practicum. So, and then, eventually got into the department and later into nonprofit work. But that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Fernando, are you in a position to share a little bit?
Yeah. So I started coming up and down the West Coast with my dad several years ago, and always did something, everything in community. So as more folks came into the community, it was, often being a translator at that age, and it was always a way of doing. It was a value in terms of helping those that. My mom had this proverb of one day for others, perhaps one day tomorrow for us. And so it was always that way. I discovered child welfare in the sense of like, oh, people get paid to essentially support a community. And so did my social work or psychology degree at the UW. Ended up there in the master's program when I discovered, it was a lot about community building. From there, I did direct practice, the Child Welfare Training and Advancement Program. At that time, they were just building a new office over in the White Center area, which at that time had a high poverty rate. There was also some, they were trying to do a collaborative center with a lot of other organizations. So it was something new. Did direct practice for a number of years and ended up at Casey Family Programs for a few years, doing policy and technical assistance, some evaluation as well, and then left, did Mockingbird Family, where it was working with foster parents, working with child welfare organizations to essentially change the culture of their organization and really be service oriented. And that's how now I'm here at Casey Family Programs and strategic engagements and initiatives, and I continue to do both working with folks with lived experience, but essentially, working with them to put them in the right place. So working with government officials, philanthropic partners, research partners in a lot of cases as well, because we know often folks are focused on data. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Thank you. And we work together at Mockingbird. That just shows like how small our community is. But like Deborah, I'm also a transracial, transnational Korean adoptee. I was adopted when I was a baby. So I had, I fell into child welfare. Actually, I came into the MSW program really interested in working with teens. I had done work with the adoption community, like adoptees, but I was really wanting to work in like community with young people. And so my friend told me about the CTAP program, and I joined my second year, and I was really focused on adolescents. Also, I think I graduated during the recession. So I was like, who doesn't want to get in like training in school and then walk into a job and get school paid for? So it just like was it sounded like an amazing program for me. And I heard they had an adolescent program. But I think what drew me to it was that first, being an adoptee. And I thought, oh, I want to do adoptions. But then I got in and was like, actually, I don't want to do adoptions. I want to work with families, hopefully to prevent adoption, right? And then I fell in love with it because I just realized it was, I wouldn't say I fell in love with it, actually. I think there's this ongoing relationship I have with child welfare. Like every day, like when you talk about equity, every day I think I think about what the work looks like and what I'm doing, and I'm making sure that it's aligning with my values and that I'm able to promote social justice in this work. And I think that I'm able to do that right now working with students. And that's so much of the work that we do is helping you align your values of social justice and equity and promoting that within the child welfare system. So I love working with students, but what actually made me continue it is I just felt like loving teenagers. I love working with teens, and I thought, and I had this opportunity to work with young people experiencing the foster care system. And at that time, we didn't even have extended foster care. It didn't even look like what we have now, thankfully, to Mockingbird and other advocacy groups. But I love that work because I felt like these are young people who are really needing support. And so I love that work. And then from that, I think I started working with advocacy groups, and I just saw the way that community, how we can engage community to really support the families. And so I fell in love with that aspect of child welfare and just the opportunities to really work with families to get out of the system. And so I love that idea of the work. And then again, working with students. So that's kind of my convoluted story. Thank you.
Right. I think it's really great to hear everyone's stories. So I grew up in India, and most of my education and my work life was there. And one of the things that was very evident is the thing that Fernando was talking about earlier about the issue of the compounding impact of poverty and neglect. And what I realized very early on is if we are looking at child well-being, we have to look at family well-being. And accessibility to basic resources and basic needs are something that I've been really passionate about, and that's how I look at child welfare issues. So I started working for the International Labour Organization in India, really was looking at child labor issues. So child labor laws, trying to push through safety standards for kids, and how do you work with all the pressures of the global world and the realities of the day-to-day realities of financial constraints of communities. From there, moved to the US. I got my master's again in global social work. So really trying to understand how do different countries, different dynamics really work, and where does child and family well-being sit in the middle of all of that. From there, worked for, again, international organizations, so Plan International and the United Nations, again, really looking at how are migrant workers, for example, or you have domestic workers who are really working, and the kids are getting impacted by the outcomes of the number of hours, employment issues, issues around not getting accessibility to resources in culturally competent manners. How is that really impacting kids? Received my PhD, and one of the things that I ended up doing was not moving straight into academia, but taking a few years to really look at how can you use innovative research strategies to really bring forward the voices of communities. So really looking at community-based research, participatory research, and data transparency if we're looking at quantitative research. So a lot of my work was targeting on that. Moved to Seattle, I was an assistant professor at Seattle University for social work, and spent a lot of time really thinking through evaluation and research from a social justice perspective. Opened a social enterprise to really target community well-being and equal pay and pay standards for families, so that, again, how do we make sure that kids are taken care of? And then finally moved last year to Casey Family Programs, where, again, on a day-to-day basis, I get to do my dream job of how do I use research, how do I use data and all of these pieces to bring forward the voices of communities and really push forward evidence, really push forward stories and programs that might really be benefiting kids as well as their families.
Great. Go ahead, Kaylee.
Okay, I was gonna say, should I go? When I talk about my journey, I really say that it starts from childhood. When I was growing up, my family was CPS involved. It was a very traumatic household as a child. Growing into my older adult years, I was in domestic violence relationships, right? And I actually fell into social work, trying to heal myself. I took a long time getting my AA. I did a lot of exploration because I had no idea who I was or what I liked, what I was into. And I ended up taking Carrie Lanza's intro to social work. And this was at UW Bothell. And I just completely fell in love with it. And so much of it resonated with me. And I really felt myself starting to heal, right? I was starting to understand these are the systems of power and, the dynamics within relationships, and really just starting to understand oh my gosh, this wasn't my fault as a child, right? And so I started volunteering with different DV organizations. I started working for an organization that serves homeless and at-risk youth, just in an attempt to try and be a person that I wish I had when I was that age. And through this work, so I'm also Native Hawaiian, so I'm Kanaka Maoli. So I am very drawn to, the Indigenous community. I'm very drawn, and I find a lot of connections and a lot of healing within the, working with the tribe here. There's a lot of comfort. And honestly, I've found so much healing, and I just want to be able to share that. Right. And I love this position that I'm working in because I help children find that permanency, right? I help children find that safety. And then through that relationship that I have with my guardians, there's a lot of days where I spend so much time on the phone with different guardians. They're like, kiddo is doing this behavior. I don't know how to handle it. I'm going to go off the deep end. And it's really just that consistent relationship of talking with them about childhood development, right? And brain development and family dynamics and trying to keep them together. And really, the other day I was on the phone with this teenager who's like, I'm running away. I hate it at my grandma's house. And then I called grandma and I'm like, this is what kiddo said. Let's sit down, do some mediated conversations, right? And figure out a solution that is creative and will keep him safe, keep him in the home. And that's just one of the things I love so much about this work, is that there's so much healing and you can really get in on, you know, the nitty gritty with people and create so much positive change. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but yeah, anyway, that's it.
That was beautiful. Yes, love and passion for the work. We can feel it. I started, I have an undergrad in sociology, and I wanted to go to school to be a therapist. And so I came to the UW. Actually, I came to the UW because I followed a boy. I actually had married him the year before, but you know, we all get places in the different ways. And I had wanted to go to school, get a master's degree to be a therapist. And someone was like, oh, you should think about social work. So I applied and I got in and I was excited. And so my first practicum, I was doing school-based social work and doing therapy. And the group of kids that I had with my field instructor, all of those young boys were in foster care. And I thought, I need to be further upstream on this because this is really hard. So how can I help and support in a different way? And so I was part of the Child Welfare Training Advancement Program, CTAP, and got to do my practicum at one of the offices and really got an idea of, and the office that I was at doesn't exist anymore, but it was the Office of African American Children's Services. And so it was very specific to addressing some of the needs of African American identified kids in the system. And so, and it was really more of a community-based model, a family-based model, and really getting to pull services around the families and the kids and not necessarily identify the kids as or the parents as problems, but really more as how do we find solutions to your current situation. And so I really enjoyed it. And I did it for 11 years. And then I moved on to academia, which I enjoy as well, and really being able to help students on their journey to being prepared for the work and to really understand the system and how to be an advocate within the system, because it's, you know, public child welfare is a big behemoth. And so how do you make, sometimes it's just those micro examples, like Kaylee was saying, like helping the family, like to see and to sit down together. You don't think that's a really big deal, but it's a huge deal for that family. And so getting those small joys in a very difficult system is what has kept me going and a part of my journey, why I continue to stay connected to child welfare.
Thank you all so much. It is always so fascinating to hear the different ways that people kind of, you know, either meander or directly fall into a pathway. And so thank you all for sharing that. I know we're kind of getting close to the end of time, but I do want to, I don't know that we'll answer all the questions that came up, but I do want to kind of tackle this piece around sort of the emotional side of the work and, you know, how do you just sort of deal with, you know, the potentially, you know, really traumatic experiences that you might be observing or witnessing, or how do you deal with sort of the workload and the avoiding burnout? So if anyone wants to speak to any of kind of the emotional aspects of doing what can be very challenging work.
I can sort of talk to that piece. I will say I dig really heavily into my culture. So like I mentioned, I'm Native Hawaiian. So I do Hawaiian outrigger paddling. That's something that, you know, the physical piece of that helps me work through the emotional and mental piece of that, right? I also do hula. And so in that, it's very healing and very grounding, and it ties me to my community. I will say there are days where it's really hard. there's stuff that you'll see and there's stuff that you'll hear that will stick with you forever. But I would say I rely on my team. I rely on my coworkers who know exactly what I'm going through. They know the people in this community, and you really draw on the strength in those relationships. Sometimes, we have our cubicles, and sometimes I will just cuddle up in my blanket and I will walk down to my friend's cubicle and I'll just sit there and I'll just be like, you don't even need to talk to me. I just want to be in someone's like positive energy, So I know we always talk about self-care and it's just kind of like this random sort of ambiguous thing. I think that pulling on things that bring you joy is so important, right? So for me, that's dancing, that's outrigger, that's art. I do a lot of art. That's something that's very healing for me. I spend time with my children. And I try to spend time with friends who aren't necessarily in this work, right? Because I don't always want to be talking about this work when I'm going to dinner with friends. But yeah, I would say the biggest thing is drawing, on your team, and then also having a great supervisor who also understands like, hey, like this is the work, it's hard, but we also have our own lives, our own families, our own appointments we need to get to, right? And so really finding a supervisor that helps encourage that like work-life balance is also very helpful. And I also do Reiki. I get Reiki done. So it's like energy work and stuff like that. So a lot of self-care, stuff in there.
Yeah, I totally ditto you, Kaylee, on like finding joy and passion in things that will rejuvenate you, because this job, all of the different iterations of social work has its challenges and also its joys. Like there's some amazing, amazing families and children that I have been able to work with over the last, 15 plus years of being in this field. And also a lot of stories that were really traumatic and a lot of very heartbreaking situations that have stayed with me, but also I was able to draw from those in like lessons learned and in how I wanted to approach my work with other future families and children, and having really supportive coworkers and supervisors, and being able to reflect on the work that we do. Because sometimes it can be very personal, and whether we have our own histories that are get bubbled up in the work we do. There's a lot of like clinical terms like transference and countertransference in how we project things, or how things get projected onto us from our families, and how that impacts us. And sometimes it can feel very personal, but you don't want that to get in the way of how you best serve that family and that child. So being able to have, like really good boundaries, learning how to have those boundaries of how to unplug from the work, giving yourself forgiveness for things that, maybe it wasn't the best day you had and you made some mistakes, and maybe some decisions were made that, you just aren't really liking. And there are going to be some tough decisions that have to be made sometimes, and just being able to give yourself that grace and forgiveness is like, I'm doing the best I can. I am human. And the people I work with are also human, and they have had really bad days too. And they may not be their best selves all the time. And so being able to give that and receive that is really, really important. And yeah, take the vacation leave and sick leave that you accrue at your jobs, do it, because this work, it can build up in your bodies, right? And and I do yoga. I do a lot of physical activity and mindfulness too, and that's been really, really helpful for me over the years. And gardening and being outside and being in nature, like whatever it is that is your personal joy, that is not work, not talking about work, not laying your work out onto your partner or spouse or your family members, and having those boundaries has really been wonderful lessons that I've learned over the years.
I think that's such a positive way to end. I wish we can kind of go on, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you all so much for sharing that. I know I'm going to take away some of those self-care reminders and tips right now, taking note. So thank you all so much. We've really just appreciated you sharing your personal journeys, but also I think some of the things that I've heard here, just the so many opportunities and diverse opportunities within the field of child welfare, and lots of credit and kudos to the Child Welfare Training and Advancement Program, which was lovely to hear as well. So just a couple of things before everyone goes for tonight. I just wanted to plug a few opportunities if child welfare is of interest to you, or if social work is of interest to you, and it's something that you want to explore some more. I'm going to drop a link where you can just check out our website for our calendar. But we have a couple sessions coming up. We have an in-person session. Actually, we'll be partnering with Shanti and Beth and some other CTAP folks to do a little info session at the 2100 building. And that's on November 28th from 12 to 1. So we'll be in person there. And then we'll also be hosting an online virtual session to learn more about CTAP and other traineeships at the School of Social Work. And that'll be December 14th. And it's a virtual session, as I mentioned, starting at 5 o'clock. All of these are on our website and more. You can find more information about our programs. You can schedule a one-on-one appointment for advising. You can email us questions that you have at sswinfo@uw.edu. So please do reach out and connect with us, and we'll have plenty of other opportunities just like this to kind of learn more from real live social workers that are out there doing amazing work in the field. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you to all the panelists for really sharing kind of such amazing information, encouragements, and realities. So thank you all again. And I hope you have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night.